Some 1960s cartoons were charming, others were just odd. And then there were the ones that felt like they were dreamed up in a caffeine-fueled lunch break with zero filter. These are the characters that make you pause mid-bite and think, what am I even watching? From bat superheroes with questionable sidekicks to telepathic walruses steering space adventures, we're counting down the 20 weirdest cartoon characters from the 1960s. And trust me, some will leave you questioning TV history itself. Batfink. On paper, a bat superhero with metallic wings sounds awesome. In reality, Batfink was a bizarre mashup of odd design choices and cultural blind spots. Created in 1966 by Hal Seeger, Batfink fought crime alongside his sidekick Karate, whose exaggerated martial arts moves and broken English became one of the most awkward things in children's television. The show's villains were equally puzzling, with Hugo Agogo leading the charge as a mad scientist clearly modeled after outdated stereotypes. Then came the Atom Boom episode, a lighthearted jab at nuclear warfare. During the Cold War. Remember, kids back then were doing duck and cover drills. Joking about atomic bombs didn't go over well. By 1968, major stations were quietly dropping it, and Batfink's few surviving episodes were locked away. It's remembered less for its crime-fighting stories, and more as a case study in how good intentions can crash into questionable execution. Even so, that shiny wing design was good enough to be recycled in later cartoons, leaving Batfink as the odd, uncomfortable ancestor of better heroes. Stringer and Tubby, the Beagles. CBS thought they had a surefire hit in 1966, combined the world's most famous band with cartoon animals. Enter Stringer and Tubby, two beagle dogs playing in a rock band that was a little too obviously modeled after the Beatles. The music was fine, the animation was simple, and the humor leaned on puns. But then someone decided to sprinkle in references to expanding your mind and tripping over your own feet, which parents quickly realized were nods to the era's counterculture scene. The Beagles performed in clubs that looked suspiciously like real underground venues, with background characters swaying dreamily and talking about seeing colors when they played. Within 3 episodes, parent groups were outraged, religious organizations called for boycotts, and CBS was hit with legal trouble from the actual Beatles management for copying melodies. It lasted just 1 season before being yanked, with most episodes destroyed during a vault clean-out in the 1970s. Today, surviving clips float around as curiosities, relics of a time when studios underestimated just how closely parents were paying attention. Jack Wheeler, Hot Wheels. The late 1960s saw a toy revolution when Mattel launched Hot Wheels cars. Naturally, ABC jumped on the chance to turn the brand into a show. Jack Wheeler was the young racer at the center of this cartoon, zipping around in flashy cars and solving mysteries. The problem? Every car on the show could be bought in stores, sometimes appearing in toy aisles the same week an episode aired. The FCC doesn't like it when a cartoon is basically a commercial, and complaints rolled in fast. Parent groups accused Mattel of manipulating kids into begging for every new release. Competitors like Matchbox went further, filing complaints about unfair marketing. It didn't help that an insider leaked memos proving episodes were literally written to match upcoming toy launches. The fallout was massive. ABC canceled the show in 1971. Mattel was banned from making TV content for years, and Hot Wheels became a textbook example in marketing ethics classes. Ironically, the scandal only made the toys more popular. Kids just wanted what they couldn't watch. Sinbad Jr. Imagine a cartoon about the son of the legendary sailor Sinbad, but set in the modern-day Middle East of the 1960s, right in the middle of political tensions. That was the setup for Sinbad Jr., complete with a talking parrot sidekick named Salty. Instead of ancient myth, the show leaned on outdated cultural caricatures, camels parked next to cars, traditional robes alongside rotary phones, and villains from fictional nations always portrayed as backward and hostile. Arab American groups quickly protested, pointing out how damaging the stereotypes were. International pressure followed, with some Middle Eastern countries threatening to ban all Hanna-Barbera shows. Even the U.S. State Department reportedly nudged ABC to drop it, fearing it might hurt diplomatic relations. After 1 season, the show was pulled. Attempts to rework it into a pure fantasy failed because the character's reputation was already toxic. Hanna-Barbera later acted like the show never existed, leaving Sinbad Jr. as a cautionary tale in why modernizing a legend isn't always a good idea. Jasper, the Funny Company. The Funny Company started with a seemingly noble goal: bring kids from different ethnic backgrounds together for adventures, but in execution, it turned every character into a walking stereotype. Jasper, the African-American boy in the group, spoke only in rhyme and was constantly shown eating watermelon. The Mexican character had a heavy accent and loved taking siestas, while the Asian girl was shy, giggled constantly, and was obsessed with math. Episodes meant to celebrate diversity instead reinforced every cliché in the book. Educational segments made it worse, showing cultural facts that were wildly inaccurate, like mud huts for Africa or dragons and fortune cookies for Asia. By episode 5, protests were underway. The NAACP, Congress of Racial Equality, and Jewish groups all condemned the show. Major cities pulled it from the air, and CBS quietly shut it down before all episodes even aired. The Funny Company is now remembered as a prime example of how good intentions can go completely off the rails, proving that inclusion done badly can be more harmful than not doing it at all. Telepathic Walrus, Rocket Robin Hood. Robin Hood in space was already an odd concept, but Rocket Robin Hood took it to another galaxy, literally. Airing in Canada and syndicated to US stations, the show featured a futuristic version of Robin and his merry men battling cosmic villains. Among his crew, a telepathic walrus. No explanation, no backstory, just a massive tusked creature who could read minds and dispense sage advice between battles. The walrus wasn't a side gag. He was treated as a serious member of the team, joining sword fights in zero gravity and helping plan missions to steal from galactic rich and give to the poor. Except these poor were often bizarre alien races, and the rich sometimes included interdimensional beings trying to collect all the universe's circles. Episodes swung between cheap, limited animation and completely nonsensical plots. One week, the walrus was fighting cyborg tax collectors. The next, he was helping reverse the polarity of imagination to save the galaxy. Parents were baffled, teachers complained it made kids spout nonsense in class, and psychologists warned it was confusing cause and effect thinking. Eventually, stations began dropping it, and CBC pulled the plug. Bootleg copies still circulate, with fans celebrating the walrus as one of the strangest cartoon characters ever put on television. PowWow, The Adventures of PowWow. In the early 1960s, someone decided kids needed a fun cartoon about Native Americans. The result was The Adventures of PowWow, and it was every stereotype in one show. PowWow, a young Native American boy, lived in a teepee, spoke in broken English, and solved problems using ancient wisdom like talking to animals or interpreting smoke signals. Historically, none of it made sense. The setting mixed totem poles from the Pacific Northwest with Plains Indian headdresses, and the so-called cultural facts presented between stories were mostly made up. Children were told all Native Americans worshipped a great spirit, lived in teepees, and had no written language. Native American groups immediately protested. The National Congress of American Indians called it cultural erasure, disguised as entertainment. Veterans groups joined in, pointing out the insult to Native soldiers who had served in the military. By 1961, major stations were pulling it from their schedules. Screen Gems eventually withdrew the show, not because of a sudden conscience, but to protect a planned live-action Western from bad publicity. Today, PowWow is remembered as one of the most tone-deaf attempts at educational children's programming in TV history. Courageous Cat. In 1960, Batman co-creator Bob Kane decided to parody his own work. Courageous Cat was a caped feline hero with a sidekick named Minute Mouse. It should have been silly fun, except Courageous Cat carried an actual gun. The cat gun could shoot different projectiles, but many episodes showed him blasting enemies point blank with little hesitation. The violence was startling for a kid's show. Villains ended up frozen solid, burnt by pellets, or knocked unconscious with explosive rounds. Fight scenes were drawn with surprising detail, showing broken furniture, destroyed buildings, and occasionally injured characters. Parents flooded the National Association of Broadcasters with complaints, especially when reports came in of kids making homemade cat guns and play shooting each other after school. The show's moral compass didn't help. Courageous Cat often caused more damage than the criminals he fought, endangering civilians just to make a flashy entrance. Stations started dropping it, and while some markets kept it running for a few years, the combination of violence and moral ambiguity eventually sank it. Still, Courageous Cat remains a weird footnote in superhero history, the crime fighter who made Batman look restrained. Minute Mouse? As Courageous Cat's partner, Minute Mouse was supposed to be the level-headed counterpart to his gun-happy boss. Instead, he often ended up in equally violent situations, armed with gadgets that were barely safer. When Courageous Cat's gun wasn't enough, Minute Mouse was there with explosives, blinding powders, or a spring-loaded trap that could knock a villain across the room. Unlike sidekicks who serve as comic relief, Minute Mouse was a full participant in the chaos. He scaled walls, launched surprise attacks, and occasionally came up with plans that caused more destruction than the crimes they were trying to stop. The show's creators claimed the exaggerated violence was slapstick, but many sequences looked more like serious action scenes with cartoon blood swapped for smoke clouds. Reports of kids imitating Minute Mouse's tricks led to even more backlash, and by the late 1960s, his name was synonymous with the bad influence sidekick in some parent groups. Today, collectors hunt for old Courageous Cat episodes, partly for the sheer absurdity of seeing a small, polite-sounding mouse delivering knockout punches and tossing bombs like it's just another Tuesday. Milton the Monster. Debuting in 1965, Milton the Monster was Hanna-Barbera's attempt at a light-hearted Frankenstein spoof. Created by Professor Weirdo in a bubbling cauldron, Milton was meant to be a terrifying creature, except the professor accidentally poured in too much tincture of tenderness, making him gentle and polite instead of scary. Milton lived with other oddball monsters, including Hebe and Jeebe, a pair of bumbling henchmen, and a talking skull who gave advice. The humor leaned on visual gags, puns, and Milton's overly friendly nature clashing with spooky surroundings. While harmless in tone, the show's pacing and weird mix of horror and sweetness confused younger audiences. Some found Milton endearing, others found him unsettling, especially when episodes abruptly shifted from cheerful to creepy. Critics at the time didn't know who the show was for. Too silly for adults, too strange for many kids. It ran for just one season, but Milton's wide, toothy grin and awkward politeness made him one of the most memorably strange characters of the era. He remains a cult favorite among fans of vintage monster comedy. Clutch Cargo. If you've ever seen a cartoon character with eerily realistic human lips moving on an otherwise static face, you've probably stumbled across Clutch Cargo. This 1960 adventure series used synchrovox, a technique where live-action mouths were superimposed on still animation frames. The result was unsettling. Clutch was an intrepid pilot who traveled the world solving mysteries with his young sidekick and a dog named Paddlefoot. The stories were standard adventure fare, but the animation was barely animation at all. Most scenes were static images with just the mouth moving, giving the characters a strange, ghostly look. The low budget meant sound effects, and dialogue carried most of the storytelling. While kids tolerated it at first, critics and parents found the visuals bizarre, and even a little creepy. Some stations pulled it, claiming it gave younger viewers nightmares. Despite the weirdness, Clutch Cargo has a cult following among retro animation fans. It's often remembered less for its plots and more as an example of what happens when a studio tries to save money in the strangest way possible. Mighty Manfred the Wonder Dog, Beanie and Cecil. Beanie and Cecil was a beloved creation from Bob Clampett, but one of its strangest stars was Mighty Manfred the Wonder Dog, a massive, lazy hound. Manfred rarely moved faster than a slow trot and preferred lounging to heroics. Manfred's superpower wasn't strength or speed. It was his uncanny ability to get into ridiculous situations and somehow come out fine. Whether stranded at sea, trapped in a cave, or surrounded by villains, he'd yawn, blink, and eventually bumble his way into a solution. The humor came from his complete lack of urgency. In an era of hyperactive cartoon animals, Manfred's slow, mellow personality stood out. Kids found him funny, but some parents thought he encouraged laziness. Critics joked that he was the only wonder dog who looked like he needed a nap more than a mission. Still, Manfred became an oddly endearing part of the Beanie and Cecil legacy, proof that sometimes doing the bare minimum can still make you a star. Snuffles the Dog, Quick Draw McGraw. Quick Draw McGraw had his share of eccentric sidekicks, but Snuffles took the cake, or rather, the dog biscuit. Introduced in 1959 and appearing into the early 60s, Snuffles had a very specific quirk. He'd only help if you bribed him with a treat. When Quick Draw handed him a biscuit, Snuffles would float into the air, hugging himself in pure bliss before collapsing in a daze. This happened every single time, no matter the danger. Need him to chase a bad guy? Biscuit first. Rescue someone? Biscuit first. It was an oddly specific running gag that kids loved and parents found ridiculous. Some stations even complained that it promoted bribery and bad manners. But Snuffles' over-the-top reaction became iconic, turning him into one of Hanna-Barbera's most memorable side characters. Looking back, Snuffles is a reminder that even in the middle of a Western-themed action scene, a good snack can take priority over heroics. Tutor Turtle. Tutor Turtle might have looked like your typical friendly reptile cartoon character, but the premise behind his adventures was anything but ordinary. In every episode, Tutor decided he was tired of his regular life and wished to be something else. A fearless knight, a daring cowboy, a brave pilot, or some other exciting persona. His pal, the wise but slightly smug Mr. Wizard the Lizard, would grant the wish and send Tutor off into this brand new life. At first, things always seemed thrilling, but inevitably, Tutor would get in over his head. Whether it was facing down evil sorcerers, trying to outrun exploding spaceships, or bungling his way through Wild West showdowns, disaster was never far away. Eventually, Tutor would shout for help, and Mr. Wizard would whisk him back home with his trademark line, "Be just what you is, not what you is not." The message was clear: appreciate who you are, but the way it was delivered could be surprisingly intense. Some kids laughed at the slapstick disasters, while others found the constant peril a little stressful. With its whiplash jump from light comedy to chaotic danger, Tutor Turtle became one of the most unpredictable and oddly memorable cartoon characters of the 1960s. Fearless Fly. Fearless Fly was a superhero parody built entirely around one wonderfully absurd gimmick. A housefly who became invincible by putting on an enormous pair of glasses. In everyday life, he was just Hiram, a meek little insect buzzing around, avoiding swatters, and blending into the background. But the moment those oversized specs were on, he transformed into Fearless Fly, a caped crime fighter who could outmuscle thugs, outfly missiles, and dodge bullets like it was nothing. The transformation itself was half the comedy. The glasses looked ridiculously heavy for such a tiny creature, yet somehow granted him super strength, super speed, and nerves of steel. Of course, there was one major weakness. If a villain managed to knock the glasses off, Hiram instantly returned to being an ordinary, helpless fly. Many episodes revolved around crooks trying exactly that, leading to frantic mid-air chases and comically close calls. What really made Fearless Fly stand out was his delivery. He took himself completely seriously, delivering grand, noble speeches as though the fate of the entire world depended on him, even when the danger was something as small as a neighborhood cat. It was a strange mix of straight-faced heroics and visual silliness that stuck in kids' memories. Years later, you might still wonder if you dreamed it, but no, Fearless Fly was very real, and somehow, against all odds, he made it work. Super President. Yes, this was an actual cartoon. In 1967, NBC aired Super President, a Saturday morning series where the President of the United States moonlighted as a full-fledged superhero. Between cabinet meetings and state dinners, he secretly fought crime, battled aliens, and saved the planet on a regular basis. His powers were a grab bag of comic book cliches, super strength, rubber-like stretching, and even the ability to transform into pure energy. On paper, it might have worked as a light-hearted spoof. In execution, the show played it surprisingly straight. Episodes had the president abruptly leaving the Oval Office to punch out giant robots, stop volcanic eruptions, or wrestle sea monsters, all while somehow keeping his identity secret, despite vanishing during every major crisis. Critics didn't know what to make of it. Some thought it was too absurd to be taken seriously, while others, including real politicians, called it inappropriate to depict the commander-in-chief as a cartoon action hero. Parents complained about the level of violence for a kids' show, and ratings sank fast. NBC pulled the plug after one season, and Super President quickly faded into obscurity. Today, it's remembered as one of the most bizarre and ambitious blends of politics and Saturday morning animation, proof that the 1960s weren't afraid to try almost anything on TV, no matter how strange it sounded. Hector Heathcoat. Hector Heathcoat was introduced as the Minute and a Half Man, a well-meaning but bumbling Revolutionary War-era patriot who somehow kept stumbling into completely unrelated points in history. One week he might be trying to deliver an important message in colonial America, the next he'd be wandering the streets of ancient Egypt, and the week after that he'd find himself in the middle of a Wild West shootout. Produced by Tunes, the series leaned heavily into light-hearted absurdity. Hector would cross paths with famous figures, from George Washington to Cleopatra, and inevitably cause some important event to happen entirely by accident. His escapes from danger rarely involved skill. More often, he'd trip, fumble, or make a wrong turn that somehow worked in his favor. While the slapstick approach gave the show its charm, it also drew criticism from educators who disliked how it twisted historical facts beyond recognition. The anachronisms piled up, but that was exactly what young audiences loved. History served with pratfalls, talking animals, and the occasional runaway cannon. Despite the historical liberties, Hector developed a loyal following. He even starred in a series of educational shorts that were shown in some schools, though they were more comedic than academic. Today, Hector Heathcoat stands out as a reminder that in the 1960s, a history lesson on television could be equal parts adventure, goofiness, and pure cartoon chaos. The Neptunes. Before Jabberjaw became Hanna-Barbera's most famous underwater band mascot, there were the Neptunes, a group of groovy teenage divers who balanced playing music with solving mysteries beneath the waves. The crew explored colorful underwater cities, encountered strange sea creatures, and somehow always managed to fit in a performance or two. The standout member by far was their drummer, a wisecracking, drumstick-wielding shark who managed to keep perfect rhythm despite having fins instead of hands. He was equal parts comic relief and action hero, cracking jokes one moment and bashing away at his underwater drum kit the next. The show itself was a strange but oddly charming mashup. Imagine Scooby-Doo with a heavy dose of bubble-filled musical numbers, all set against a backdrop of neon coral reefs and futuristic sea domes. One episode might feature chasing a ghostly figure through a kelp forest, while another had the band foiling a treasure-stealing villain before their big concert. While it never reached mainstream fame, the Neptunes carved out its own quirky niche. Viewers weren't always sure if they were watching a comedy, an adventure serial, or a rock concert in scuba gear, but that unpredictability was part of its charm. It didn't last long, yet it paved the way for the music and mystery formula that Hanna-Barbera would revisit throughout the 1970s, proving they weren't afraid to get weird under the sea. Ricochet Rabbit. Ricochet Rabbit wasn't just fast, he was practically a blur in a sheriff's badge. As the lawman of Hoop and Holler, his signature move was ricocheting off anything in sight to chase down outlaws. Walls, saloon doors, water towers, even people. Nothing was off limits. His extreme speed meant most of his lines came out in a rapid-fire blur, punctuated by his trademark ping, ping, ping as he zipped from place to place. Teamed with his polar opposite, the slow-moving and soft-spoken Deputy Droop-Along Coyote, Ricochet was part of a classic fast and slow comedy duo. Their contrasting styles created plenty of humor, with Ricochet ricocheting headfirst into trouble while Droop-Along shuffled along behind, eventually helping to save the day in his own plodding way. Kids loved the non-stop energy and wild chases, but some parents weren't thrilled about the constant collisions, pratfalls, and chaotic stunts. The sheer level of slapstick made it one of Hanna-Barbera's more frantic offerings, and there were murmurs that it encouraged reckless play. Still, Ricochet Rabbit stood out in a decade crowded with animated Western heroes. He wasn't just another cowboy with a horse. He was a sheriff who treated the entire frontier as his personal pinball machine. And really, how many lawmen can say ricocheting was their primary mode of transportation? The Great Gazoo. Introduced late in the Flintstones run, the Great Gazoo was a tiny, floating green alien exiled from his home planet as punishment for inventing dangerous devices. Banished to Earth, he landed squarely in the prehistoric town of Bedrock, where only Fred Flintstone and Barney Rubble could see or hear him. Naturally, this led to endless misunderstandings with their families, who thought Fred and Barney were talking to themselves. Gazoo possessed advanced, almost magical technology capable of solving problems instantly, fixing machines, creating objects out of thin air, or transporting people anywhere in seconds. But instead of helping, he usually made things far worse. His smug, know-it-all personality didn't help matters either, often turning simple situations into chaos just to teach Fred and Barney a lesson. The character split audiences right down the middle. Some fans embraced the sci-fi twist as a fresh injection of silliness into a show that had been running for years. Others thought a futuristic alien clashed with the Stone Age setting and undermined the series' prehistoric charm. Despite appearing in only a small handful of episodes, the Great Gazoo left a massive footprint on the Flintstones' legacy. Love him or hate him, he's proof that even the most beloved shows can suddenly swerve into bizarre territory and still create a character people talk about decades later. From gun-toting cats to telepathic walruses, the 1960s gave us a gallery of cartoon characters so strange you'd swear they came from a fever dream. Some were ahead of their time, others were just plain misguided, but all of them left their mark on animation history. Which of these oddball characters do you actually remember watching? And which ones make you wonder how they ever got on the air? Drop your favorites in the comments, hit that subscribe button, and let's keep digging into the wild, weird past of television.